And with that, Catherine, I think I'll get started.
Sounds good.
So tonight, we are going to mainly talk with Howard Wilkinson, but we thought we'd give you a task at the beginning that we will come back to, circle back to at the end. This was suggested to us by one of our Fair Districts volunteers. If you're describing the August 8th election to a friend, what is the short, sweet way that you describe it? What's your elevator pitch? And you have plenty of time to think about that. And then at the end, we're going to ask you to put your vote no in August elevator pitch into the chat, and we'll save them. We're going to talk about August 8th lawsuits. We're going to have the interview, and then we're going to tell you about the ways that you can engage for the vote no in August. So just going over the lawsuits, I think everyone knows that there are two lawsuits that were brought by One Person, One Vote in regards to the August 8th election. And there was some action this week regarding one of the lawsuits, which had to do with the ballot summary language, both to do with the accuracy of the language and also whether or not it was kind of slanted, whether it was truly a fair and non-biased summary. And so the Ohio Supreme Court actually decided that the language was not accurate and it did need to be changed. And that was mainly on a kind of a technical issue, the description of how many signatures needed to be collected from each of the 40 of each county. And so they changed that to make it more accurate. However, they did not agree with the One Person, One Vote when it came to the description and the title of the ballot language. And they maintained that it was okay to have the elevating the standards. And we feel like the word elevating has a value. It's like making them better as opposed to just making them more. But unfortunately, the court didn't agree with us there. So the language on the ballot was changed to make it more accurate, but it still has what we think is a little bit of bias in it in terms of using the word elevating. The other lawsuit has not been decided yet. And that lawsuit is whether or not it's legal at all to have this election, since they did essentially ban August special elections, except in very specific circumstances, which is localities that are under a fiscal emergency. And so that we are hoping that there will be a decision about very soon. A lot of people are saying that because they bothered to go back and tell the ballot board that they needed to change the language, the summary language, that probably means that they're going to say that the August election is legal and can proceed. However, I just thought I would pop this in here. There was an editorial from the Toledo Blade today, which basically said that it basically said, we are gonna just slant this, so many people are against this special election or against the resolution that it's possible that some folks in the GOP who have been pushing this special election are gonna look at polling and decide, yeah, maybe we don't want to do this. Maybe we don't want to get, spanked, as it were. And maybe they're going to go and pressure the justices on the Ohio Supreme Court to say that it's illegal, because it will be less embarrassing for them to have the whole election taken away than it will be to be crushed at that election. Now, that may be wishful thinking, but I just thought I would share that with you as a kind of interesting take on that lawsuit, and we will find out the answer hopefully within a few days, a week, something like that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Catherine Terser, who's going to introduce Howard, and then I'll close these slides and just have the two of you talking.
All right, well, I am extremely excited to introduce Howard Wilkinson. So, he is a veteran reporter. So we're talking about a 50-year career. One of the things that I think is interesting is that, in fact, when he was a student at Ohio University, he would play hooky and come to the State House. And so we know that he's been around the State House for a really long time. He's somebody who has had, has expertise in baseball, in Ohio politics, and the Civil War. We're going to talk to him today mostly about the upcoming August special election, but I'm also going to ask him some questions about redistricting. Now, if you have a question, we don't always do this as a webinar, but we decided to do that after we had a few hiccups. So why don't you put your questions into the Q&A? I likely won't get to all of them, but we are going to pick Howard's brain. He's had 50 years following Ohio politics, and I'm sure that we can learn a lot. And once again, Howard, welcome. We're just so really pleased that you're here.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
So I'd like to start with a kind of a simple question, like, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how it is you, for example, decided to become a reporter?
Well, Catherine, it started early on. I grew up in a family where we got two newspapers. I grew up in Dayton, Ohio, and we got the Dayton Journal-Herald in the morning and the Dayton Daily News at night. And I read newspapers since I was a little kid. I was always fascinated by the news, by history, by, what was happening. And in Dayton, in downtown Dayton, and some of you from Dayton area will probably remember this, there used to be a bookstore downtown called Wilkinson. And when I was old enough, I'd get on the bus and go downtown. And Wilkinson had this section where they would sell dozens of out-of-town newspapers. And I would get them by the stack and carry them back to our neighborhood. And I'd do nothing for days but read these newspapers. In fact, when I was 13 or 14, a friend of mine and we started our own little neighborhood newspaper. It was a 4-page thing. And I'm going to make a confession here. The only way I could think of to print it was to break into the neighborhood United Methodist Church. I knew how to get in through the basement window. We'd go into the secretary's office and I'd fire up the old fashioned mimeograph machine and we'd make copies of it. Nobody ever caught me, but it's like, I did this. This was a First Amendment mission by a little kid. So yeah, and that's pretty much, this has been in my blood forever. So since early childhood.
Well, that's amazing. I also came from a household where we got the New York Times and we got the Wall Street Journal, and my father and mother would bicker over how they differed and what was missing from one and the other. And it sounds like just kind of a challenging and exciting childhood. All right, let's try this. This one is a big one.
Okay.
So you've been following Ohio politics for 50 years. I really paid a lot of attention to like one of the columns that you did that was like, I sound like a cranky old man. And it made me think about like, well, how have things changed in Ohio over 50 years? And what are your thoughts about that?
Well, back in the 70s when I was, really getting into this and like you say, borrowing John Kieswitter's car because I didn't have one and driving up from Athens to the State House. Politics was tough. It's always been a tough game, but there was more collegiality. There was more, people would at least talk to each other and be willing to find the middle ground, compromise. And that's the only way things got done. And they did get done, throughout that period of time. But I don't have to explain to you what happened to American politics. What happened to American politics was Donald Trump and the whole thing. And ever since then, it's been nothing but, people at each other's throats. And frankly, it's not as much fun. It used to be fun. Now it's more like, it's going to war every day. And that's, and I can do that. That's not a problem. But, I do kind of miss the old days when you could sit and talk to people like Vern Rife and Stan Aronoff in the same room
Yes.
and sit there.
Oh, and for the young folks in the room, who are Vern Rife and Stan Aronoff?
Vern Rife was a long time Speaker of the Ohio House, a Democrat from Southeast Ohio, and the longest serving Speaker of the House. And Stan Aronoff from Cincinnati was a state senator and president of the Ohio Senate. I used to go I just wander into Vern's office and sit down and talk. And most of the time when I did, Stan would be there.
Mhm.
And they would be talking about issues and trying to find that common ground. And the other person was always there was Vern's right-hand man, who was Bill Mallory from Cincinnati, who was always there whispering in his ear saying, don't forget the cities, don't forget the cities, don't forget the cities. And he didn't. He understood that, and that was part of his equation when he was dealing with Stan Aronoff. But I mean, that's how I learned this business, was being able to have access to those people. Now, a lot of politicians tend to run and hide from people like me, and it's much more difficult to get them to open up.
All right. Well, many of us have read your recent columns about the August special election and the upcoming issue 1 of the August special election. I just wanted to understand your take and what you think about this whole kit and caboodle.
Well, I mean, I know, Catherine, you've read the columns, and I'm sure others have as well. There's really no doubt about where I come out on this thing. I think it's a sham. I think it's a joke. I think it's totally unnecessary. And I've said so repeatedly on WVXU.org. I cannot, you talk about elevator talk. My elevator talk would be, do you seriously want to go to the polls and vote for something that is going to has the potential to take away part of your power as a voter?
Mhm.
And why would you do that? And I can't, and I've asked people that question, and I've yet to hear a good answer.
Mhm.
And when you talk to them about it in those kind of terms, people understand that. They say, okay, what if I'm on the wrong side of the 60% threshold? And 40% of the people can basically veto my opinions. Well, there's something just basically wrong and undemocratic about that. And I'll tell you the truth. Excuse me. I don't think it'll pass. I think there's a very good argument to be made that maybe they'll cave on this question of the whether or not this was done legally in the first place and save themselves some embarrassment. But it was a total Hail Mary to try to get Ohio voters to do this in order to stop the pro-abortion coalition from getting on the ballot and succeeding. Because if they do get on the ballot, they're going to get a majority vote, I think.
Mhm.
But 60% is a lot, and I'm not sure they would get that.
Mhm.
So, but if they get 58%, if they get 57%, which I think was the number in Michigan, let's say they get that. If they get 57% of the vote and this thing is in place, they lose. And I cannot, in my wildest imagine why that would be a good thing. If a majority of Ohioans say, we want this, how can 40% of the people block it? Anyway, I'm ranting now.
I was going to say, it is incredibly painful that they would choose political expediency to stop something that, that they don't like, without thinking about, how this impacts Ohioans, how it impacts the state of Ohio. It's not always going to be 2023. There are going to be issues that they will approve of, and bond issues and things. It's just,
But I don't think they
incredibly
care.
sad.
I mean, I don't think they care. When it comes right down to it, somebody like Matt Huffman, I don't think he cares about that. All he sees is this goal post in the distance, and he's going to try to throw a touchdown pass. Well, good luck.
Well, Mia at the beginning of this talked about how the ballot board, the initial language was found to include some inaccuracies by the Ohio Supreme Court, but that they did not make changes about, things to make it more neutral. And I just wondered what you thought about that process.
Well, yeah, that's typical of, a ballot board these days. And since Frank LaRose obviously has a whole lot riding on this, he was going to make sure that there was ballot language which wouldn't push it just a little bit, just push the envelope a little bit. I don't think it's outrageous, but I think it's one of those things that, for folks like you all, and that's how you have to campaign, is saying, hey, look, this is not what it appears to be.
Mm-hmm.
The ballot language is skewed somewhat, and you got to get that message across.
Yeah, it has to be really clear to people that the state legislative leaders are trying to fool us into giving up our rights and diluting voter power. I'm somebody who's spent most of my political career working on citizen initiatives, and in part because, of course, it's hard to ask the state legislature to address gerrymandering, right? They're actually, it's a powerful tool. It's hard to give up. And so, I've been engaged in a number, 2005, 2012, and on, where the only thing I left with every single time was just how incredibly challenging it is to do citizen initiatives. So, one of the things that signature gathering is so hard. One of the things that I wondered about really had to do with, campaigns that you've seen, your sense of what it's like to do a citizen-led ballot measure.
Well, I mean, it's extraordinarily difficult under the present rules, not to mention what it would be like. I mean, it'd be near impossible under the state issue 1. As far as the special interests, yeah, there are special interests, but aren't necessarily out of state, and they aren't necessarily wrong. And it's a rare thing in Ohio that you do have some kind of corporate interest coming in and trying to hoodwink the voters. It just doesn't happen that often. And some of these issues, and Catherine, I think we talked about this today with the redistricting. You helped negotiate what the system that we're under right now, but you did it in good faith. You did it in good faith that the other side would uphold their end of the bargain. Well, they didn't. And that's why right now, I mean, today, I've been working on a piece that I hope will come out either by the end of the week or early next week about Michigan and what they've done with their independent redistricting commission, where they take elected officials and completely out of the process. And they've done it. They've gone through a cycle of elections, and it works. I mean, it really works. So, we've always had this, we look down our noses at Michigan, and people from Ohio sometimes, but they got it right this time. And there's a whole lot that Ohio could learn from them.
Yeah, I was going to say the folks on this call are ready to do an independent citizens commission. I think I've had this conversation with you before where, these folks are essentially drunk on power. And what do you do with drunks? You take away their keys. And
That's
that
right.
means that we need to create an independent citizens commission. Now, there is a question that is in the Q&A area. And this is for Wenda. She asks, Howard, I've been telling people that I've been voting for 50 plus years, and this is the worst ballot measure I've ever seen. True for you too?
Well, that's a lot of ballot issues. Yeah, and the worst, it's right up there. If it's not the top, it's one of the worst. It doesn't make any sense. There's no reason for it. That's the bottom line. There is no reason for this state issue 1. It doesn't fix any problem. In fact, it just creates new problems.
All right, Eliza has a question. Would issue 1 of the August special election affect just citizen initiatives or changes to the Ohio Constitution, or will it address like the initiated statutes or laws?
Well, I mean, the 60% thing would apply, but it's not, the state initiated ballot issues are going to be affected by this. I think that was part of the court decision as well this week.
Yeah, I think it's important, like most of us, clearly if we're worried about addressing gerrymandering, we need to change it in the Ohio Constitution.
Yeah.
Because that's where the rules are.
Yeah.
And of course, there are lots of things that we could do statutory, you could do a statutory initiative. So like a minimum wage, or I don't know, marijuana legalization. Those are things you could do statutorily. It's just that there's no safe harbor. So even though the constitutional amendment doesn't change statutory initiatives, one of the arguments was like, oh, well, you know what? Maybe people will actually try to change the law rather than going to the Ohio Constitution. But that statutory initiative isn't terribly attractive, is it?
No, it's not at all, because they're not going to do it. This legislature is not going to do those things.
Yeah, they can be immediately overturned.
Right. It can be overturned very easily. The only way to do this is by putting it in the Constitution with a citizen petition initiative. That's the only way this is going to change.
All right, let's see. So what do you think of the new ballot language?
Well, as I was saying, I don't think it's major changes, and I think it's things that, you could explain fairly easily to the people who are going to vote. And I'm not sure who that is, to tell you the truth. Besides, the one side, I think you've got the numbers over them. They've got, business organizations which really don't represent anybody. They don't even represent their employees, for that matter. But I think the ballot language as it is now is by no means perfect. And it does kind of put the thumb on the scale a little bit for the pro issue 1 side. But I don't think it's anything that can't be overcome with some just basic explanations to get the word out. I mean, and a lot of this is going to be word of mouth, not necessarily, expensive TV campaigns and that sort of thing. I think I told you about this, Catherine. My little diner up in Clifton, in my neighborhood where I go have breakfast a lot of times. And I heard there were 3 guys, they were about my age, in other words, old, who were having breakfast, and I was listening to their conversation. The one guy started talking about state issue 1. The other 2 So, what's that all about? Why are we going to vote in August? And he explained it. And he said, it's really a stupid idea. Here's why. And he gave them the reasons. And they were buying into it. They were saying, yeah, that is pretty stupid. So this guy sitting at a little breakfast table in Clifton on a Saturday morning, he just turned his vote into 3.
Mhm.
And if people, if everybody who was opposed to this thing did that, it would be no contest.
Absolutely. What we've been talking about 9 and 9, that idea of, what we should, not everybody is going to be out there distributing flyers, but we can talk to 9 other folks and turn our people power out that way. That notion of let's get, 9 of our friends at minimum.
I think that's a very important part of a campaign against this thing. To me, it's a really valuable tool. All you folks, every last one of you.
So, you watched the merry-go-round of the redistricting. Were you surprised that elected officials didn't actually follow the Ohio Constitution?
I wish I could say yes, but I can't. Not in this circumstance, not with the people involved. Who were on that commission on the Republican side, because from day number 1, it was clear that they were going to use every means available to avoid going by the wishes of an Ohio Supreme Court majority and doing whatever they want. And they got lucky with the federal court, and after that, they were off to the races. So, am I surprised? No. I know these people too.
Well, I have to tell you, I assumed that there would be, how can I put this, shenanigans,
Right.
but that in fact, especially the rules that focused on keeping communities whole, some of the greater transparency. Yes. It's just been incredibly sad for those of us who've been on this track fighting gerrymandering for so many years, that the legislators that participated in developing the proposal and negotiated didn't actually do it in good faith. It was just, many of us have been at this for years and years. And so I wouldn't be surprised if our friend Joan Lawrence, former state rep, is on, and she was the chair in 1981. So there are many of us who've just been at this for years and years. So speaking of years, for more than a year, the Ohio Redistricting Commission has not complied with the order to create new state legislative districts. What do you think will happen?
Well, I think at some point when they think nobody's looking, they'll end up, the Ohio Supreme Court will do what it wants to do. Because they have the votes now. Sharon Kennedy is not going to stop them. So, those days are gone. Can I tell one little story about?
Oh, please do.
You talk about, and they did give some nods to the other side during that process, on things like the composition of districts and the city lines. But, here in Hamilton County, in western Hamilton County, and a large strip of land in north central Hamilton County were somehow jammed into the district of Warren Davidson, who is from Troy, Ohio, which is, I used to work in Troy, Ohio. I was at the newspaper there for 5 years, and it's very Republican, very conservative. And that whole district is Butler County, Darke County, Preble County, the portion of Miami County that's in that district, there's a little finger that goes across and takes in Troy, so that Davidson can actually say he lives in this district. Well, in Hamilton County, what they did, and they were trying to help Steve Shabbat, the longtime congressman here, they were trying to make life easier for him. So they took about 30,000 African-American voters in that, who were in Shabbat's district, in places like Forest Park, Winton Woods, Lincoln Heights, all majority minority areas, and put them in Davidson's district. Well, those 30,000 people were obviously heavily Democratic, African-American folks, and they're lost. They don't have a congressman now because he can win without them. And they are totally, to me, it's almost like I can think you can make a 65 Voting Rights Act case on this situation, because these people were basically left without representation. I don't think Warren Davidson would bother to call or bother to return phone calls from people in Lincoln Heights, because he knows, number one, they're not going to vote for him. Number two, he doesn't need them. And it's just an egregious, to me, it's just an egregious example of them gaming the system with redistricting. Anyway, I'm done with that rant.
Well, this sounds like the kind of rant I go on a regular basis.
Yeah.
So there was a point there where you said, you mentioned that the new Ohio Supreme Court. And so, you know, one of the challenges that we have is, even though the district lines are going to need to be redrawn before 2024, that's what the Ohio Supreme Court has said. So that should go ahead. They're going to have to do it at some point. But we have a new Ohio Supreme Court. What do you make of the new partisan labels that were in place for the first time for election 2022? And what are your thoughts about the new Ohio Supreme Court?
Well, first of all, since the 1980s, when I was at the Enquirer, I've been kind of pushing the idea of merit selection of judges in the first place. I don't think it should be a matter of, you know, these horse race contests for judges. You know, you can appoint these people through an independent commission and make them stand for either an up or down vote, whether or not they retain their positions. To me, that's a fair system. Hanging party labels on these judicial candidates is just another example of how they try to game the system. They think that that's going to make people, you know, people are going to automatically vote for Republican judicial candidates. Well, I don't know about that. They will in large portions of the state, but it's sure not going to happen in this county or any of the other urban counties that that we have in Ohio. So I think they're really overestimating the impact of that. But it makes it easier for the Republican Party. One of the problems the Ohio Republican Party has had for years, and they keep trying to address this, and I think Triana Field he was banging on it when he was the Hamilton County chair, and he's doing it again as a state party chair, is that they got to get the word out to their people who their judicial candidates are, because oftentimes in the past, whether the voter is Republican or a Democrat, they go into the polling place and they really don't know who these people are. You know, especially if they're running for the first time. And then it becomes a game of name recognition. And so they just poke the one that they kind of think they know who they are. And that doesn't help the Republican Party, particularly in a county like this, in Hamilton County. In fact, it probably, it favors the Democrats. So they want to at least make sure that they can go to their voters and say, these are the candidates that you need to vote for, and have it very clear on the ballot. And they reinforce it with all kinds of social media messages and mail pieces and that sort of thing. So, you know, it was done for a purpose. And as I said earlier, I think the whole thing is just a sham, that electing judges, you know, in a horse race. I just don't think it should be happening.
Yeah, it's interesting when we think about kind of systemic kinds of reforms. Obviously, this is a group that's really focused on, making sure that there are fair districts, merit selection, or another way to actually have a judiciary is well worth considering. Another thing that folks in Ohio are considering is ranked choice voting. So Jeanette has a question here about what you think about ranked choice voting to avoid kind of more extreme candidates.
Well, Cincinnati has a long tradition of that, going back from 1925 until 1957, where we did have what was called then proportional representation, and people would rank their candidates for city council. That ended in 1957 because the Republican Party in Hamilton County decided that if they kept that system, and under the system of choosing a mayor back in those days, where the council itself chose the mayor, Cincinnati was about to have its first African-American mayor in Ted Berry. Well, they couldn't allow that. So they put something on the ballot, they sold it, spent a whole lot of money on it, and convinced people to get rid of that in favor of a 9X system. Ranked voting, people say that it's complicated and it's takes too long to count, and all of those other excuses. Well, that was true in the 1940s and 1950s. I mean, it would take several days sometimes for Cincinnati City Council to be elected, 9 members. But this is 2023, this 21st century. I mean, you can do this easily. There are computer programs, obviously, they could do this in minutes, if not, or hours at the most. So those kind of excuses I just don't think apply anymore. I kind of like it. I kind of like ranked choice voting, because then you can, and what it did in this city for all those years with PR was it guaranteed that minority groups in the city would have a voice. African Americans would have a voice. This goes all the way back to the late 1930s. And, people had this idea of Cincinnati as a Republican city, but, it wasn't reflected in the results of the elections, the local elections. So I think it's fine. I think it would be a great addition. But how do we get there?
Well, and one of the reasons that I say that issue 1 of the August special election is, it's anti-democratic, obviously, because of the 60% and, the making direct democracy more difficult. But there's also the whole issue of they know that they're going to make it harder to address gerrymandering. They know that folks are organizing to do ranked choice voting. Like they are very intentionally, yes, we know they were playing games because of what they want to do to make things harder for the folks that will have a ballot measure on in November, but they are making it harder to address, what about dark money? Like, I would love to have a dark money ballot measure.
Yeah.
So it's just, it's just incredibly challenging. So we need to do what we can to kind of get the word out, have those neighbor to neighbor conversation. So we're going to wrap up very soon. But, one of the things that I did want to ask you, and I know folks, there are a lot of questions in there. It was about kind of the changes in journalism
Yeah.
and how it impacts democracy.
Yeah.
And what your thoughts are about how we can improve things. What does it mean to be neutral? What do we do about disinformation? So I realize that was a lot of little questions, but I figure you have a lot to say.
Yeah, I do actually on that one. I mean, because I've lived it, for the last 50 years. When I came to Cincinnati in 1982 to the Enquirer, and I spent 30 years there, there were something like, I want to get in the neighborhood of 250 news employees. Well, today there are like 45. Newsrooms are shrinking for the most part, and particularly the traditional newspaper newsrooms, but also, same goes for TV newsrooms. They're shrinking. Now, there's one good thing that's happened in my years since I went to WVXU is they've actually expanded their staff, but it's like a drop in the bucket because of companies like Connect who see the bottom line. That's the only thing that matters to them, and they lay off employees routinely. In my case, they offered a early retirement buyout, and I took it because I knew what was coming. And as long as newsrooms and the number of people who are working in them continues to shrink, it's going to be more and more difficult to cover these issues, more and more difficult. I work with kids who are part of the journalism program at Walnut Hills High School in Cincinnati. And I've been doing that for like 9 years now. And some of these kids really want to be in journalism as a career. Not all of them, but some of them.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to be very difficult for them. It's going to be difficult for them to find the right kind of platform in the news business these days because everything is shrunk. And when the news business shrinks, democracy suffers. That's just a fact. And I don't know what we do about it, but I'm trying to encourage these kids to fight it.
Absolutely. And I've been pleased with the kind of nonprofit journalism that has entered Ohio.
Yeah.
All right. I'd like to say a big thank you to you, Howard, for spending time with us. I know that we didn't get to all of your questions, but we appreciated the opportunity to pick your brain and get to know you a little bit better.
Thank you.
With that, I'm going to hand it back to Mia.
And
Mia,
you can always
ready?
email me. Email me the questions if you like. I'll get to them.
Sounds good. So we'll throw in Howard's email so that you can actually see when you get the follow-up, you'll have Howard's email, you'll have the slides, you'll have this recording. And here we go. And Mia's got the slides back.
Yeah, there you go.
Thank you so
All right,
much.
so
Catherine,
Okay.
go ahead.
okay, so one of the things that we wanted to highlight are a couple different things that were recently in the news. One was about the impact of the 60% threshold, because of course, one of the things that we care about is, well, how is this going to affect our ability to do a citizen initiative related to an independent redistricting commission? Some of us on the call are thinking ranked choice voting, but it's important to realize that we're talking about a 60% threshold for every change to the Ohio Constitution. And so there was a recent article that Tiffany just shared about all the different times something passed, including prohibitions against creating a monopoly in the Ohio Constitution, that they passed by less than 60%. And then Mia, if you'll go to the next slide. And then I also wanted to highlight today that dozens of business leaders came out and they urged Ohioans to vote no. And I think that's it's incredibly important because, of course, with the Ohio Chamber of Commerce coming out and saying, hey, everyone should vote yes, we're worried about minimum wage. They're not thinking through how stopping citizen initiatives like our attack on gerrymandering will impact the business community. But these are folks who took some time, thought about it, and have an open letter. Now it's an ongoing open letter, so other business leaders can step in. So if you have folks who want to, if you're like, oh, I have a business friend, I know somebody who's a small business, or I know somebody who's active and in their corporate law or whatever, reach out to them and let them know about this letter. And with that, Mia, I'm going to hand it back to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Catherine. So thank you guys for all of your questions in the chat. We will, continue try to answer some of them. And yes, we are very hats off to Unlikely Allies, says Trevor. And I know that some of the businesses, for instance, restaurants, feel very pressured by, the Restaurant Association. They're not supposed to speak out against it. So I think this is very important. And I will let others answer the questions that are popping up in the chat. We just want to make sure that you know how to begin to spread the word. Tim O'Hanlon said, everyone's been very quiet. Well, we've been trying to make noise, but we're going to continue to try to make noise. The official campaign is votenoinaugust.org, and you can go on there and you can sign up as an individual. You can endorse as an organization. If you're looking for a little bit more explanation of, this whole issue about August 8th and issue 1, we have 2 versions of just one-page explainers. Catherine talked about mine plus 9. The idea is, spread that word like the guy in the diner. Don't just keep it to yourself. Make sure you have a plan to vote, but take responsibility for at least 9 friends, neighbors, colleagues, whoever, family, and make sure that they know about this election as well. Yes, yard signs are coming. It is frustrating. The arrival date seems to recede into the future, but hopefully they'll be here by next week, and they will be free. They will be distributed to in kind of large batches across the state, and then you'll get information about where to pick them up. And, if you want to take a few and distribute to your neighbors, that's a great idea as well. Yes, so they're coming soon. There are flyers that you can order, and Tiffany will pop the link in. There's a couple of different versions of flyers. This version has a lot of very practical information on the back about voting deadline, registration deadline, about how to vote by mail, and all of that kind of stuff. And that's really important. We have plenty of these flyers. If you want to get 500 of them and go to your July 4th parade and hand them out. If your organization wants some, that's absolutely fine. Just fill out the order form there. We'll make sure to get them to you. There are pledge cards. That's kind of a slightly different thing where you're collecting information from the person and getting permission to be back in contact with them. If you order, you also order on that same order form. You hand it, you're going to enter that information into a spreadsheet so that we can be back in touch. There are groups that are going door to door and using both of these things. There's another card that's just been developed, and there's a separate order form for this card just to make it complicated. It's kind of a long, thin card that has a little bit more information. So, and it is a great idea with whatever card or flyer or sticker or button you have, to use that as to put it on social media so you can share all of that information. You can definitely go to the state fair. There will be a massive presence at Pride. At least I hope it will be massive. Lots of people will be handing out these various flyers and things at Pride. We're also encouraging people to share their thoughts. So lots of people have been writing letters to the editor, and we have some tips on how to do that. We have this cool page on our website, on the Common Cause website that Kelly from Common Cause has put together with different people, their photo, their name, and a title. And then when you click on the box, it has a quote from them about why they're voting no. And you can also do this. You can email Kelly and you can join in and you can take a look at this and see what you think. So, oh, I think we skipped a page. No. All right. So we do have some, the kind of links that we always share with you. I also wanted to remind you about the elevator pitch. If you have thought about how you want to share, how you would share a sentence or two about why it's important to vote no, that's a great thing to do. You could pop that in the chat and we will. I see that Laura has one. I know Jackie put one in. There's lots of folks that are putting that in. So go ahead and pop that in there. I'm just looking through the chat to see if there's anything else. Laura has one, elevator pitch number 1. It's a special election for special interests. Absolutely, I agree. No in August means yes for democracy. That's a great one. Yes, some of us have been door knocking and lots of people know about the August 8th election and lots of people do not know about it. So I definitely encourage you to spread the word. People have been putting stuff in their car windows, etc. Catherine, any other last words?
Other than please help get materials out, talk to your neighbors. There are a lot of different opportunities to engage. For example, Columbus, we have Pride coming up. And then just think about, all the different, parades and events that there are during the summer. This is a great opportunity to get active and let folks know that the election is happening, how problematic it is, and what, the impact on all voters.
Absolutely. Marcia Silver, will there be door hangers? I'm not sure, possibly. A lot of these flyers are pretty good for just slipping behind, not in the mailbox, or, is a good one. Cheryl, the number of groups, it's confusing. This is something that happens, everyone is doing something where I think just work with whatever group you're comfortable with. I mean, Common Cause is doing a ton and, we have access to all the information. So I encourage you to work with us. ACLU is doing a ton. The League is doing a ton. The official campaign is votenoinaugust.org. It's kind of, we'll be sending out these links, but, and yes, ODP is also doing Vote No in August stuff. So whichever group you kind of normally work with, I'm sure will have access to materials. So I think you're fine with whichever you decide to work with. We will send a follow-up, which will have lots of useful links, as well as a link to these slides and to a recording. And just, I know this is the Fair Districts Huddle, but guys, just realize that if this passes in August, it's going to be essentially impossible to do a redistricting ballot initiative. So this is kind of our most important thing that we need to take care of first. And once we've taken care of it, then we go on to redistricting. Trevor is raising his hand.
Yes. Thank you. I saw that Marcia Silver had said that she had requested some flyers, but hadn't heard back. I saw you. I see you on the list, and you're in Cuyahoga. Sue Dean Dyke is the regional distributor up there, and I shared with you. I sent you her email address, but I was wondering if Kelly was folks who had requested those materials. Are we giving them the address, the contact info for the regional distributor people?
Yes. So if anybody if you filled out the request form, once we know the pickup location has received their batch and they're ready to let people come pick them up, we send emails out to everyone. So notifying you of that. And they will be, most of the times they're bundled in, they're bundled in little bundles, but they're not necessarily named.
Yeah, so we'll just make sure that you get the information for your local person. Bill, what organizations would contacts from postcards be shared with? I think there's a couple of organizations that are doing postcard campaigns, and basically you get a list of addresses and then you write the postcards. I'm not sure what you mean by, you mean, oh, I know, you mean with the pledge cards, if people have filled that out, that is just kind of going into, if they give permission to be texted, then that goes into like a van and list, and then we're able to text them to remind them to vote. I think that's what your question is, but I'm happy to answer you later.
Essentially, there is a shared statewide, what they call C3, voter action network, which is a database. So it does go into that. So it's not specific to an organization, if that helps. So like if somebody does a pledge card, that doesn't mean that like Common Cause is getting their information.
Right. So Jim and Donna asked about t-shirts. The campaign has not said for sure whether they're doing t-shirts or not. I kind of guess that they won't get around to it, but maybe they will. But Jim, yes, you definitely could make your own t-shirt. And there is I think Tiffany dropped in the chat. And if she hasn't, we'll make sure to send it. There's what they're calling a toolkit, a partner toolkit, and that includes a link to a bunch of different graphics, and we'll make sure to send that to you. It also has messaging. There's a lot of messaging in there, and that's really helpful too when you're thinking about how to talk about this, how to share things via social media. But there's lots of really good graphics in there, and so you could definitely use those to make your own t-shirt. And I think with that, we should probably say thank you guys so much. We really appreciate your great questions. And we thank Howard and Catherine, and we will send a follow-up.
Thank you, everybody.